Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Book Talk Tuesday. I am Danielle Ramirez, and today we are so fortunate to have Toni Federico here talking with us about their book. And welcome, Toni. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for everybody out there watching on YouTube, welcome. We are going to talk about Tony's book today, Psycho Bitch, a love story under writing as AJ Rico. And I'm going to just share a little bit with you all about Miss Toni Federico. She is a digital surface designer, writer, and podcaster based in the Midwest. Her artwork has adorned the halls of the Wichita Art Museum, Wilson K. Cadman Art Gallery, City Arts, and Interurban Art House, among others. She has also been featured in Uppercase Magazine, Sketch Design Repeat Kit, Elephant Journal, Writer's Digest, and The Mighty. My goodness. In her practice, Al Medicine Designs, she's been delighted to work with brands such as Greatness Vodka, Nubian Hair Collection, and Incredibly Sweet Gourmet Treats. Oh, yes, fantastic. Highly recommend. Toni also co-hosts the Two Cranky Creatives podcast and the Graphics Gang Patreon with her creative partner, Carrie Cantwell. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's you stay busy.
I try.
Yeah, so tell everybody just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, as a writer, I started writing in 2004. I began with children's books. It's a very competitive market, and I don't know, I just didn't have a passion for it, but that is where it started. My whole writing career started with children's books because of
Mm,
my daughter. And from there, ironically, I transitioned into romance.
okay.
And I wrote, I want to say six romance novels before, and they're also under a pseudonym. They're under Aline Salinger. But then I just kind of got bored of the romance formula,
Mm,
and so then I wrote Psycho Bitch, which is, I would say, women's fiction or contemporary fiction.
okay.
Uh, uh, and so and along the way, I've written essays that have been published in magazines and things like that. So that's kind of my writing career. I'm also an artist and digital surface designer. So wallpaper, branding, menswear, fabric, lots of different things in that regard. So
All the things, all the things. So I have had the pleasure of working with you initially when we compiled the Being Wichita Women book, and so you have an essay published in that anthology. But for anybody out there who doesn't know, Tony also did the artwork and the cover, which has gotten so much great feedback from people. So we have not just an author but a creative here. So tell us. I'm faintly familiar with the romance formula. It's not my favorite genre, but it's a huge genre,
uh-huh.
and it's an important genre. And there are times where I would dip into it. But so tell us a little bit about what led you to kind of switch up and then go into this book. What was that? What was that process like?
Sure. So I had just finished my series of erotic fiction for my publisher in the UK and had stepped away from that and was thinking about kind of like what did I want to do next? Like what kind of writing did I want to do and in my private life I will read anything, like any genre. Like there's very little that I won't read. Um and I was reading The Sociopath Next Door,
Mm,
which is a nonfiction book written by a sociopath, a diagnosed sociopath. And it was just so fascinating to like see the world through this lens, and it was a woman. And so, the thing that separates like this is a kind of like a joke that I say, like the thing that separates writers from normal people is that when we say what if, it takes us 80,000 words to answer the question. And so as I finished this book, my question was like, well, what if a sociopath actually fell in love? What would that
mm,
look like?
mm.
And that was the birth of Psycho Bitch. And I love titles that are kind of like plays on words. So, when we have a euphemism in the United States that if we say like the ex-girlfriend is kind of like wonky, we'll say, oh, she was a psycho bitch, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's where the title came from.
Okay.
But Psycho Bitch, a love story. So,
hmm
you know,
hmm
and Charlotte's a very interesting character. So,
Oh, fantastic. So I haven't read it yet, but I have it right here, and I am now very excited to dig into it. I have, a lot of different things I'm reading, so I have this pile of books, and I have been eyeballing this one, and I am just like so taken aback, and oh my gosh, I wanna get in there, and I know as soon as the semester's over, it's going to be one of the first books I read this summer. What I really like too about the cover, that is, one of the main focal points is like the heart is just down here and then you see the measurement. So talk to us about that as a creative designer. I know there's some meaning behind that.
sure. So yes. So when I was thinking, so I designed the cover of most of my
Okay.
book.
Okay.
But so when I was designing that cover, I was trying to think like symbolically, how could I represent really a lack of love, right?
Mm,
And so but does she have love, does she not have love, like what's really going on? And so I ended up on this heart and a scale. I like because I had seen like a blood drive or something, and they always have like this scale and like I don't know, whatever it is, like a needle or something, I don't know, and it's like they're trying to
hmm
get to a certain amount of blood. And so I was like, well, that would be a great metaphor for this sociopath that we're following through a love story.
hmm
And so the idea is like there's a little bit there, but it's not quite full. And then, and then so you have to read the book to see what goes beyond that.
No, absolutely. So that's interesting. I didn't know that the inspiration was the sociopath next door. I
Mhm.
think I read that. I think it must have been 15 years ago,
Uh-huh.
maybe. So now I'm like recalling, specific parts about that, but I was not aware that that was actually written by a sociopath. So that brings the text to a whole other light.
Yeah,
And if I remember correctly, there was a little bit of tension in there about when it comes to like, labeling people so sociopaths, that just as like human nature, we
uh-huh.
tend to, want to other people and
Right,
demonize other groups. And so
right.
I remember there being a little bit of caution in there about completely condemning
Yeah,
sociopaths, but that brings up just the point of like, even with the image here, is like, is there capability for a love, even just a little bit?
right.
And so like you said, exploring that what if
Mhm.
is really I imagine pretty fun to see where that could go. And so I'm curious, as you were writing this, did you know what your ending was going to be ahead of time, or did you kind of think about some different paths it could take? What was that like for you as a writer? Because I'm always just curious to hear about people's process and what that was like.
Sure. So the thing that I have found in all of the books that I've written is that it doesn't matter what I think the ending is going to be. It's going to be what it
Mm,
is.
hmm,
So I had an idea of what I would like the ending to be. But as I learned the hard way in some of my earlier books, like if I fight where the characters are taking me, then the writing kind of stinks.
mm,
So, I would say this book mostly went the way that I thought it would go. And to your point about labels, I think the appropriate way to refer to it is antisocial personality disorder or something like that.
yes, yes, that's the updated terminology.
Yeah.
Thank
Um,
you.
and one of the through lines in the book, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but it's Charlotte's interactions with a psychiatrist
Mm,
and the clinical notes that come from that. And so that was kind of the through line to show like who she is subconsciously as she's wrestling with changes in her life, like, as things kind of fall apart and come together and she has to transition through life and things are not going the way that she thinks they should go. You know, and but so, and the sociopath next door was definitely a huge inspiration. And there was another book I read too, and I don't remember the name of it now, but it was also about sociopathy and what does that look like for the people who experience it. And, there's a big debate on do they have empathy? And it's just they're not like trained or like because like some scientists they're like have done like brain scans and you've got psychopathy versus sociopathy and like what's the difference and all this other stuff and I leave
Mhm.
that to the experts. um
You and me both. You and me both.
this is very much just kind of like a character study of this, what does this really look like if we have a person who in theory is capable of love,
Yeah.
but what's that path and how twisted is it? And so,
No, absolutely. I find it fascinating because, as we go through life, we can learn enough about a subject just to be dangerous enough
yeah.
to develop this like really depthful character
Hmm.
who runs into snafus and things that that are happening in their lives that they didn't imagine would happen. Um, and something that you said that I really like to hear, and if I could record this and go back, I would, but I'm gonna definitely highlight it, is that like even if you think you have an ending in mind, like you kind of have to let the characters go where they're going to go. And I think that is incredibly powerful. Like that's an incredibly powerful practice for anybody who's doing any kind of writing, is to let it flow naturally and really tap into that intuition.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, that's really strong. And I think that's probably where we get some of the best characters and the best stories, is when we're not trying to make it happen a certain way that we think it needs to happen. So,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for my own writing process, I do very in-depth character profiles before I ever start writing the book. And I land somewhere between seat of the pants writing and fully planning out a book. But the one thing I never ever skimp on is I do very detailed character sketches from who their parents are, what kind of
mm,
dialect they might speak, because even in America we do have, someone in Mississippi speaks very differently from somebody in Oregon. And like their loves, their passions, their problems, even if like they constantly chew gum, you know what I'm saying?
mm,
Like I want complete characters for the fact that I want their speech patterns to be different from each other. I want their reactions to be like the most disappointing thing for me as a reader is if I read a book and I can't differentiate the characters. They all
mm,
sound the same, they do the same things, and it's so it just becomes like this really flat, no texture story. And so I do try to infuse all of my characters with a lot of personality. But within that, what that also means is, if I said that they have a stepmother they hate, then how they interact,
mm,
regardless, it's going to change things. And, if I don't let it go, kind of like where things are, because subconsciously I've absorbed this information. So even though I might sit down and think, oh, yeah, like I know what this is going to happen, it could go somewhere completely different. And I personally think that's the beauty of writing, is the ability for, to just channel a story, I think is really beautiful.
mm. No, it is. And I mean, it doesn't only take the reader on a journey, it takes the writer on a journey.
Mhm.
And as you're tapping into the creativity and whether it's life experiences or imagination, or like you said, like your the planning versus the pantser, like it's some kind of combination that is unique to you, right? In your
Yeah.
process. Like so it kind of melds and kind of takes a life of its own.
Uh-huh.
I think it's really fascinating too, because sometimes when we're writing and let's say that there's a character who hates their stepmother, and you're kind of, you're not outright saying that, or maybe you are, but then you see the way that they're talking and their actions and maybe some hidden thoughts about it, depending on the point of view. But what's also interesting is that you may get to a point where that does change,
Hmm.
and whether it's like consciously or subconsciously for the writer. And so then the reader's like picking up things, and then as a writer going back and making sure that, wait a second, does that actually make sense to
Right.
others? Is that part of the natural change? Like, so that's always, I feel like, the fun part of like going back and revising and looking back at it with fresh eyes. So
Yeah.
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 So you talked a little bit about your writing process. So what is your revision process like? I mean, I get to I find like it's almost just as fascinating to talk to authors about what revisions are like than it is the initial writing.
Uh-huh. I think like most writers, I hate revisions. The thing that's really difficult for me when it comes to editing is that I am a person that when I write it, it is gone, right? So it's no longer in my head. So I don't like remember a lot. But you would think that would make it easier, but it really doesn't.
Mm,
What it means is it kind of means I'm done,
mm,
right? Like I'm done. I don't want to deal with this anymore. But more specifically, what do I force myself to do? One, I go back and I revisit all of my character profiles because if I said you hate your stepmother, you don't get to hug her as soon as you see her. You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? So like
Yeah.
refresh all of that as I go into editing. But I would say the thing that I find most, I have kind of like a three-part process that I use for editing. So the first is I highlight all sensory information in
Mm,
every scene. So
mm,
that means taste, touch, sight, whatever. And then I try to look to see if it's balanced or if I have left a sense out completely, right? So like if I've walked them into a bakery and the only thing they're doing is smelling something, I need more sensory information.
mm.
And so I'll use different colored highlighters and yes, I've printed this out. I
Yeah.
print it out. I can't stand staring at a screen forever. But you could obviously do this in Word with highlight. So, but then I'll highlight all the sensory information and look at that. But then the other thing that I do is I will take each scene and I will white out all of the dialogue.
Mm,
And that way I have to, that way all of my description and exposition must make sense and stand alone. And then I'll do the opposite. I'll
okay.
take away all of the description and all of the exposition and just leave the dialogue and then
Yes.
make sure that that can stand alone. And so that's kind of like my three-part process. And then after that, I hire an editor.
Yeah. They can put it in their hands, right? Yeah,
Go
no,
go
I
forth and
think
conquer.
yeah, I think that is a genius process, and it obviously works really well for you. Because I get even just on the Being Wichita Women book, which even though that is nonfiction, it's still your writing, and I still get compliments and feedback about just the story that you wrote on a
Oh,
pretty regular basis.
that's
So
lovely.
you're doing something that works and something that can be emulated if others were interested in trying that approach. I think that's a really good way to do that, and I'm gonna hang on to that little jewel. Um, yeah, so we are actually coming to an end, and now I just want to talk about all of your books. But just tell us a little bit, Tony, where can people order this book? Is it on
It
Amazon?
is on
Where?
Amazon.
Okay,
It's on various distribution channels, but it is on Amazon.
fantastic.
Um, you can look up if you look up AJ Rico, it'll pull it up. Obviously, Psycho Bitch is the title, so you can get that. My other books I write under Aline Salinger, and I
Okay.
gotta admit, my publisher is going through some weird changes.
Mm,
They're in the UK. They kind of sold my rights, and there's a new
mm.
publishing house in town, and it's weird. And
Oh,
those are those are hard to find at the moment, but you can find them. So they're there.
yes. Yeah, I feel like that's the publishing routes, that could be a whole other conversation too. I mean,
Oh,
in addition to just the writing, that's I'm sure a
yeah.
journey in and of itself.
Yeah, I've got lots of lessons learned if you ever want to talk about book contracts.
Yes, actually, that may need to be one of the topics. So, and that's quite swarm. I'm learning about it from the other end. And so, but also being like a small indie publisher and
Mhm,
being a member of the Independent Book Publishers Association, I love how well they have written out some of the criteria for hybrid publishers and
mhm,
smaller publishing houses about and specifically naming contracts and that being easy to understand, fair, negotiable, those kinds of things. So
mhm.
yeah, that's a whole other conversation. As we wrap it up, do you have any advice for any authors out there, whether they've never published a book and are just, writing and maybe hope to one day publish, or for even somebody who's published, was it six children's books or six romance? You've published how many books? How many
Eight,
writings you
oh, I
eight?
have 8 novels altogether.
Okay.
A bunch of short stories too. So, but 8 novels altogether. Most of them in the romance realm, one
Yes.
contemporary fiction, and then I have a literary fiction book I haven't shopped out yet. I haven't felt like putting the effort into it.
Hey, you're human. I get you. I get you. So what advice do you have just for a wide range of authors, I guess, and writers?
I so Mm, I would give two pieces of advice. The first is don't read negative reviews. Just
Mm,
don't.
just don't.
Just don't. People are I've had everything from I wish I could delete this book twice
Mm,
to, to, how it changed their life. You know what I'm saying? Because I had acknowledged something that I didn't even have in my head when I wrote it, but they saw the theme in there. So like just don't read them. It's, people, you can't please everybody.
absolutely.
Which leads to my second piece of advice. You can't please everybody. So write what is in your heart, write what your characters are telling you to write, and forget about everybody else while you're writing it. There's an audience for you. But
Mm.
the moment you start trying to write for somebody else, you're never going to write anything interesting again.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting because that is contrary to some advice you will hear about having your audience in mind at the beginning, which I think can be helpful in a broad sense. But then, like you said, knowing going into that even if you have even a semi-defined audience, that you're not going to please everybody out there.
Mm-mm.
Like
No.
that is impossible.
Yeah.
And yeah, what I can't second your first piece of advice enough. Just that how important it is to have your own voice and have it be authentic to you as a writer, because like you said, there's however many different people are, is how many different interpretations there are.
Mhm.
And people, I feel like people view the world through their own lens of experiences and biology and all the fun things that make up, a human, and then their experience with the particular book. And so if there is something that's negative or hurtful, it could 100% be that something that they're going through that is totally unrelated to the actual work that you've put out there. So that is phenomenal advice, and I appreciate you sharing it with folks.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for being here today. Thanks for everybody who's watched. Get Tony's book, and then maybe we can bring you on again once I've read it, and then talk about contracts. I mean, it sounds like we have a lot to talk about. So,
Yeah.
all right. Thank you. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.
See ya.